In today's show, we're going to be looking at the Atlanta Hawks. Tons of young players on this team for us to talk about. A team, one of the few teams that does have cap space coming up in the offseason. Michael Bolton, he wants to hear about it.
Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com and at Yahoo Sports Australia, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. We are 5 teams into the season in review series. We're looking today at the Atlanta Hawks. They do have the upcoming 6th pick in the NBA draft. Lots of interesting players to talk about with this team as well. And as I said at the open, one of the very few teams that does have some cap space heading into this off-season. Now, of course, as with all these, we start them off by answering your questions, whether you throw them on the Instagram stories at Locked On Fantasy Basketball or on the Twitter question that I throw out. Let's start with the Instagram questions, and there's just questions all over the place about John Collins. That is the number one question, I think, that I got all over the shop. So, Proctopus and Raul Coelho and Lampros Mekourakis. That's the first 3 questions I'm looking at here at John Collins. Duffy Co. questions about John Collins. Is John Collins a max player? Is he still a top 20 option in Dynasty? He is one of the hardest guys to really get a handle on. Suspended this year for those 25 games for a drug suspension, and amazingly, he was the 13th ranked player in fantasy this season. He averaged almost 22 points with 10 rebounds. He hit 1.5 threes. He blocked shots. He got steals. His efficiency was through the roof. He was unbelievably good, and I've talked about John Collins for years. He is going to be a top 20 fantasy player. He's there already in 3 years. Will he stick there is the big question, because the Hawks, as we know, traded for Clint Capela, and we don't know how those two are going to coexist. Does this mean that they want to move on from John Collins? Will they want to pay him his contract? I think John Collins is really good. I mean, I've said that. It was ridiculous that he fell as far as he did in that draft. I think he's really good. I'm not sure that the Hawks value him as highly as they should, and I think that leaves his future a little bit up in the air, but he took a big step. He played an extra 3 minutes a game. He became a 20-point per game scorer. He is unbelievably good as a fantasy player. We know this. There is that concern. Now, part of that concern is that 47% of his minutes this year came as a center. They, theoretically, will play 35 minutes of center, 33 minutes at night of center with Clint Capela instead of Damian Jones or Alex Len, which is what they were doing for big chunks of this season. So that changes things. Does that drop his field goal percentage? Does that drop his block rate? I would say, does that drop his rebounds? I'd say the answer to all those things is probably, and maybe not, and maybe not noticeably big. That's terrible English. But I think it has to have somewhat of an impact. I'm not really worried about usage for Collins because he's really bloody good. And you could make the argument, I think you'd be okay in making this argument, he's a better player than Clint Capela. For fantasy, we know that he is. In real life, I think what he can do at only 23 years of age, there's still a lot of growth there with Collins, but a lot of people panicking. So what that means to me, right, is the amount of questions of panic there with Collins is that there is maybe some scope to acquire him at a cheaper price in a dynasty league, just because there is that worry. And I think the worry has some level of basis there, and we can understand why there's that sort of worry. But I'm okay with him being a consistent top 25 minimum, maybe top 30 guy for the next 5-6 years. I think he's really good. And I think that maybe the panic is a little bit too high at this point for Collins. I still think that he's got a lot of value and a lot of upside left in him. And so that's the question about him. We'll talk about him a little bit more later. Snapshot, do the Hawks trade Kevin Huerter? What's his trade value? Well, it's all, as I said in, I think, yesterday's show or the day before, it's all well and good to say, do they trade this player? But what are they getting back? Like, you're getting back something good, then maybe you entertain it. You don't just trade players, and this goes for fantasy leagues as well. You don't just trade someone for the sake of trading them. You trade them because it makes sense for your team, it makes sense for your future, it makes sense for your present. You've got to get the right player back. Now, Herter, I thought, had an opportunity this season to step up. He didn't really do that, but he's 2 years into his career. He's only 22 years of age. He played 31 minutes a night. I wouldn't be rushing to get rid of him. I think he's a better player than Deandre Hunter. I'd rather have Herter and Radish as my 2-3 than Hunter in that mix for sure. So I wouldn't be rushing to trade off of him. Calvin KW Lai says, is Clint Capela a top 30 pick? He was the 37th ranked player this season. So I would be pretty hesitant to throw a top 30 pick on Capela. Top 45, sure. 4th round pick, maybe late 3rd, no worries. Top 30, I reckon you're maybe pushing it a little bit there. I don't really see that. I'm not sure. Look, maybe he fits better in a non-D'Antoni system, but he's pretty bloody good under D'Antoni for the last couple of years. Is Trae Young a lock first rounder with players like Durant and Steph back? Yes, I would be. If Trae Young falls out of the first round, I think you are doing really, really well if you get him in that second. Because as I said, I'm going to say it now, he was a 7th ranked player this year. Yes, Steph comes back and probably goes ahead of him. Durant, maybe he goes ahead of him. But would you rather take Trae Young or LeBron James at this point? Or Kawhi Leonard at this point? Or Joel Embiid at this point? Like, I have really little doubt that Trae Young is going to be a first-round pick. I'm almost certain that that's going to be the case, and I don't think really he should fall out of that first round in any sort of scenario. That's the next bunch of questions. Where does Trey rank next year? Look, I don't know yet because I don't know how the projections are going to play out, how free agency and trades and drafts and all that stuff's going to pay out. But I feel pretty good about him being a top 10 player. T. Channers, can Capela and Collins play together and do well? It's not outrageous to think that they can play together. I think they can, especially with Collins' level of shooting. Is it ideal? I don't think so. I think you want Collins a little bit more playing at center, but I think they can do well. There just will be somewhat of a drop-off in their little marginal drop-offs, blocks, field goal percentage, rebounds for both. Actually, more for Collins as he pushes to the perimeter a little bit more. All right. Let's have a look. Cole Arby, who gets more minutes out of Hunter and Reddish? It's a good question. Hunter had more minutes this year, 27 to 32. He shouldn't have had more of those minutes, I don't believe. I think that Radish is still the better option there, but I do believe they will give Hunter more minutes next season. That doesn't mean he'll be better, because he won't be, and Radish is already the far superior fantasy prospect in those fewer minutes, and I think that will continue to go as we go through their careers, but I do think that Hunter will get more of those minutes. Let's now go through to some Twitter questions that came in. They're going to be very, very similar questions again. How much better can Trae Young get from Xavier Guino? He was ranked 7th over the past year. Can he reach that same production? I don't know how much better he gets from next. He had averaged 30 and 9. He had 1.1 steals on 44 and 86, but that's the number, 44. Can that go to 46? Can he average 31 points? Can he hit 4 threes a game? He was at 3.4 this year. I absolutely think that's a possibility for him. He had a 36% usage. At some point that will come down, but not much. We're seeing NBA teams really going to heliocentric offenses, meaning one star gets all of the usage or 2 stars get all of the usage and everyone else gets nothing. So many below average usage players in the NBA these days. So I think that'll maintain. And he's got the ability, look, if you have a weird year where he gets to 1.5 steals, where he gets 4 threes, where he hits 46%, like those things aren't ludicrous to think that he could do, and then that pushes him into top 4 category. So yeah, he can still get better a little bit. The Lounge Room GM says, if they had their time again, would they still take Hunter and Reddish knowing what they know now? Well, I'm pretty confident they wouldn't trade up to get Deandre Hunter. That was stupid at the time. It looks worse in hindsight. I don't think that they would do both. I think they'd be really happy with what they got out of Cam Reddish, and I think they would take him there. But trading up to get Hunter, I don't think that is what they're looking at. Another question here is, does the Capela trade from Yezra, does the Capela trade mean they're not willing to give Collins a max? I don't think it means that. They've got so much cap space. They've got $51 million in cap space coming up, and there aren't players out there who are worth that money. There just isn't a bunch of good players out there who they're going to be able to bring in. So they're going to have money, and he is part of their young core. He should be considered the number 2 player behind Trae Young on this team, and I think they absolutely should be giving him some pretty big money for the upcoming season. Mark says, can they make the playoffs? Can they? Yeah. Will they? I think they're a little way off that at this point. It depends what they do with that $51 million of salary, and how they address the backup point guard position and the development of guys like Hunter and Reddish and Collins and Capela playing together. I think there's a chance they can sneak into the 8th seed, though. Darren Wilson, Dazza, says, I have Kevin Huerter in a Dynasty League. I need to drop 2 before the draft. Luke Kennard's on the waiver wire. Who has the higher upside? Do I have less competition for minutes for Kennard? But I feel like Huerter's secondary ball handling makes him the better bet. Well, Daz, I think that first bit is what you want to look at. Less competition for minutes goes to Kennard. Kennard is a good secondary ball handler. He is going to have those opportunities, and I think he is the one that I would take there over Huerter. Huerter, again, is a player that I really like, old fan of pants, but I think Kennard is someone that I would take because he can handle the ball as well, and I think he's got a real opportunity to step forward this season. Let's have a look. Would a player like Royce O'Neal from Zach Bogdan, Royce O'Neal, be ideal for playing next to Trae Young since he has a low usage rate? Like, they're the sort of guys that you do want ideally. And that's, I guess, the theory behind Deandre Hunter. The problem is he's not a good as defender as what they think, and he's not a good three-point shooter. And he just, wasting that 4th pick on someone like that when you can get undrafted free agents to fill that role wasn't the greatest move. So, yeah, I think you do want, alongside Trey and alongside Capela and Collins, you want a low usage defender, and I think that is the guy that they should be looking at. Jared Johnson says, how would you see Capela and Collins playing together? Does anyone take a hit, or will they both be behind? He's leaning toward them both being fine. As I said before, Jared, I do reckon that there is going to be a marginal hit maybe to block rate and field goal percentage for Collins, and maybe a little bit of a drop for Capela, but I don't think it's going to be all that massive for them. Do I see Trey as a top 20 player? Yeah, of course. He's a top 10 player, and he can really push a little bit further than that. And last one from Matt Lawson, Dynasty ADP, NBA Dynasty ADP. Which of these Hawks Dynasty ADPs are you buying or selling? Trae Young at 7, buy it. John Collins at 19. Probably buy it. Capela at 55. I think I'd be okay with that. Radish at 89. Feels a little aggressive, but I don't hate that one. Huerter at 97, not sure, probably sell it. Deandre Hunter at 136, there's absolutely no interest in him at all. Bruno Fernando at 273, yeah, take it or leave it. Jeff Teague at 275, no interest in that at all. Dwayne Dedman at 278, no real interest in him at all there. The Radish one is the most interesting one out of that group, I think, at 89. He could push to be a top 50, top 60 player, so maybe I would buy that, but there are some concerns with him as we're going to talk about really soon. Let's go into these individual players now. Trae Young, the 7th ranked fantasy player, big PIPM despite being one of the worst defensive players in the NBA. Big Raptor, great true shooting, massive usage. He was an absolute beast all season for this team. As I said, he averaged 30 and 9. What the hell else more could you ask for from a guy like Trae Young? 35 minutes a game. He had a couple of ankle injuries during the year as well. There is still scope to improve, but he, to me, is locking in as a top 10 player for the next 10 years, maybe. There is absolutely massive numbers coming from him, and part of the reason his advanced numbers do drop off is because of his defensive stuff, because his offensive play is stellar, and that is why he is as high as he is in fantasy rank. I don't really know what more there is to say about Trae Young. He projects really highly moving forward for this upcoming season. I don't think you should be worried about your Durant and Steph coming in and taking his spot in the top 10. I think he's 22 years of age. He's had 2 years in the NBA. And while looking at those numbers, it is hard to see where the improvement comes. 31 points and 4 threes is not outrageous. I think that's a real possibility. If he just does everything else the same as what he did this season, but instead of hitting 3.4 threes, he hits 4 threes, then he is a 31 point per game scorer, and he does become that top 5 guy, and that's without anything else changing. So I think that Trae Young is absolutely fine as we move forward. What an outrageous statement for me to say that Trae Young is fine, because we know that he is really, really good, and he would have a guy that I was pretty high on in drafts this last year. I think I had him around that 12, 13 mark in terms of where to draft him, and he obviously blew the shit out of that. The next guy we talk about is Johnny Collins, who, amazingly, the 13th ranked player. How did he get there? Well, it was almost 1.5 threes. It was over 1.5 blocks. His steal rate came back up. His true shooting was through the roof. He averaged 22 and 10. You could not have asked for anything more, apart from him not getting suspended for drug use. He played more minutes, which we've been calling for a while. He looked really good out there. He played well next to Trey. He bombed threes at 40%, only took 3.5. Now, if that can go to 6 a game, not crazy. He hits 2.5 threes. He averages 25 and 9. He blocks 1.4 shots. He gets a steal a game. He gets 80% from the line. Like, those shooting percentages, I don't think from the line are going away. The problem is the 2-point finishing, because he was at 64% there from 2. That's a little bit of your worry as to where that fits with Capela around, if he's pushed a little bit further out from the basket. But Collins, I think he'll struggle to live up to the 13th ranked player, but top 24, I think he's a second round talent for next season, and maybe he pushes into that third round. But he looks really, really strong. His advanced numbers were good as well. Not as good as what that fantasy rank would have you believe. 0.86 PIPM, negative 0.4 Raptor, but the true shooting's great. Good usage numbers as well, and put up the numbers that we wanted. Again, we still don't know, and it's one of the biggest concerns heading into the offseason about how it works with Capela. But if you're going to prioritize one guy, it's going to be Collins, and let's hope that's the way the Hawks look at things. Next up is Capela, who was the 37th ranked player this year. Didn't play a single game for the Hawks, only 39 overall with that foot issue, heel issue, 33 minutes, 14 and 14 with 1.8 blocks on 63% shooting. We know that Capela is a punt free throw guy, just 53%, but he's a low volume guy, so it is recoverable from. This was not his best season. Last year, he was the 28th ranked player, averaging 17 and 13. And I guess when people are saying, can Capela become is he a lock top 30 player? They're looking at that season and going, well, yeah, he did it in that year where he had 18% usage, and his 16 or 17% usage from this season can go up in Atlanta. And that's all very true. So much of that's going to come down to what happens with his free throws. He went from 64 down to 53%. That's a drop, pretty obviously. So he loses a point per game there just with that free throw percentage drop. His blocks are always hovering in that 1.5 to 2 range. That's similar there. I don't think that the 13.8, 14 rebounds per game is going to stick. Interestingly, we thought it would really drop off with Westbrook coming to Houston. He increased his rebounding numbers. In fewer minutes, he went from 12.6 to 13.8. So that is one of those buck the trend type of situations. Centers, all they have to do is get out of the way for us. Well, that actually didn't happen, and Capela's rebounds went up. He doesn't provide any threes or assists, and his steals are pretty good for a center, but not spectacular, not Andre Drummond level, but 0.8 steals are pretty good for Capela. He had really good advanced numbers as well, plus 3.1 Raptor, 1.35 PIPM. True shooting was strong. I think he's an absolute lock for a third round to fourth round sort of a pick. I don't think they're going to want to have Capela over and go, well, now we're not as good of a team, so therefore your usage has to go up, because they've got guys to take that usage. They've got Young, they've got Collins, they've got Radish, perhaps. They've got Hunter. They've got other guys that'd rather have that usage, and whoever they pick with the 6th pick in the draft. And my last mock draft, I had them picking Tyrese Halliburton at number 6, a guy that can come off the bench, who can play with Trae Young, with Kevin Huerter. I think he'd fit exactly what they need to do. So Halliburton to me is who I have them picking it at number 6. I don't think they'd take another wing like an Isaac Okoro. I don't think they'll take a big man, considering they just traded for Clint Capela and haven't seen that. I could see them with a Denny Avdia coming in if he does slide to them. A Devin Vassell would be another guy that they could look at in that scenario too. I don't think they'd take an Obi Toppin, who literally is a worse and older John Collins. Let's go on to the next bloke on this list, and it is Pants, the Ginger Ninja, Kevin Huerter, 106th ranked player this season. Negative 1.48 PIPM, negative 2.8 Raptor, under average or under 54% true shooting was not great. He averaged 12, 4, and 4 with a steal per game on 41 and 83%. And one of the big worries with Huerter to me, like he's a good 3-point shooter, 2.3 a game, and he hit 38% of them, is he just really struggles to shoot twos and to finish at the rim. That's reflected in a couple of things. That 2-point percentage at 45% and the fact that he attempts just one free throw a game because he doesn't get to the rim. He hits 83% of his free throws. If he can figure that out, get stronger, finish through traffic, push to the rim, get the free throws to 3.5 a game, get your 2-pointers to 50%, then we're talking about a guy that can be a 16-point per game scorer, and then his value jumps into the top 100 really comfortably. A guy that can handle the ball a little bit. I think that'll decrease somewhat as Radish gets more comfortable and if they bring in Halliburton. So that's a worry for me with Huerter. But I do really like him. I get the fear that he might be squeezed a little bit here in Atlanta as to where his role is. But that doesn't mean we give up on him long term. It's really interesting to see how this team is going to look after free agency and after the draft, because I worry a little bit about where he fits, but I still do believe in Huerter as a long-term solid enough player in the NBA and fantasy prospect. His advanced numbers aren't fantastic, but still in terms of total value over the next few years, he's right up there. He's 4th on this team behind Young, Capela, and Collins. So he's right up there in terms of that value over the next 4 seasons, and he's probably still 3 or 4 years away from his absolute best season in the NBA. Guys, Built Bar is back. It is the best tasting protein bar you will ever find. It doesn't taste like something that you scraped off the bottom of your shoe like most other protein bars do. Not that I know what tasting something off the bottom of my shoe tastes like, but I can just imagine that it tastes exactly like those terrible protein bars. Built Bar is one of those protein bars, not one of those. It is the protein bar that tastes just like a candy bar. And they are back and they are bigger than ever with 6 new flavors. Apple Almond Crisp, Carrot Cake, Lemon Almond Cheesecake, the old Cherry Barcia, Cookies and Cream, Caramel Brownie to go with their 12 original flavors. They are low calorie, low sugar, high protein, high fiber, delicious treats to help you lose and maintain weight when you're looking to get that protein in. The Coconut Almond Bar has 18 grams of protein and just 180 calories and only 5 grams of sugar. You could not ask for a better nutritional profile. And right now, if you go to BuiltBar.com, you can use the promo code LOCKEDON and you save $10. That is $10 off your next order. Use the promo code LOCKEDON for $10 off at BuiltBar.com. Alrighty then. The next player we take a look at is Jeff Teague.
My name is Jeff.
Someone mentioned Jeff Teague to me the other day, and I forgot Jeff Teague existed. And then furthermore, I forgot that he was the starting point guard for the Minnesota Timberwolves this season. He came to Atlanta in a trade that was weird for Alan Crabb. He moved into a backup role. And to be fair to Teague, who I said at the beginning of this season, this is his last year as being a starter, and I think that's accurate. He's 32 years of age. He was pretty okay as a bench player for the Hawks. He averaged 23 minutes a night coming off the bench, 10 points, 4 assists, 44% shooting, 36 from 3. Totally fine and reliable as a bench guard. But that's what he is at this point. He is a backup guard. With the abundance of options they have on the wing, I don't think we really should be seeing him play or playing as much as he did alongside Trey. But this guy is an unrestricted free agent. They're going to renounce his cap hold because it's something crazy like $28 million to get that space. So he's gone. But I wouldn't be surprised to see them bring him back without bird rights at a cheaper price, mid-level price, $7 million for 2 years to be a backup point guard, depending on what they do in this draft. But I just don't think that he's going to be an impactful guy at all. He was 154th in fantasy this year. He'll probably fall outside the top 200 coming up. His advanced stats were pretty rough. His shooting numbers weren't fantastic. Overall, a true shooting of 55.7, which isn't a disaster, but it's not elite. He just fell off really, really considerably. His defense struggled as well during the year. It just wasn't a good year for Jeff Teague. And at age 32, he's going to be suffering a pretty significant drop-off coming really, really soon. So just watch for that, because that is happening here with Teague. So his value is about to tank really hard, and it already did last season, so you're already aware of that if you have him in a dynasty format. But don't be blinded by the name value and think that he's going to go somewhere and have a ton of value, because he's just not, in my opinion. Next up, Cam Reddish, who, let's be fair, and I like to be fair as much as possible, one of the worst players in the NBA at the start of the season, or probably the worst rotation player for the first 2 months of the season. But unbelievable improvement, looked really good towards the end of the season, and sort of not fulfilled my prophecy, because that makes me sound like some sort of crazy person. But what I said coming into the draft, I think Cam Reddish will be a better fantasy player than Deandre Hunter, and it's obvious because he took more threes, he's a better free throw shooter, and he's a better defender, and he's a better passer. And we saw all that stuff come to fruition, I thought, with Radish during this season. He only shot 38% from the field. He shot 33% from 3. Like, those are terrible numbers. But he did start to really get better. In his last 6 games, he had 3 20-point scoring nights. And the shooting numbers really started to step up for Radish. Radish scored double digits once in his first 12 games. After that, it became a commonplace thing. But he can do other things. And we didn't really see the flashes of passing happen all that much. We saw really good steal numbers, 5 steals in his last 4 games. But he can be a guy that rebounds, gets assists, gets steals, hits some threes. You have to still worry about the percentages, but he's a good free throw shooter. And the scoring was there. I was really impressed by the turnaround in Radish. I still don't think he's going to be a fantastic player, but I believe in him much more than I believe in Deandre Hunter. He is almost 2 years younger than Hunter as well, just turned 21. He averaged 11 points with 4 rebounds and 1.4 threes and was the 188th ranked player this year. The advanced stuff was still rough, mainly because it was absolutely horrendous to begin the season, and then it jumped up. I would expect that true shooting of 50 to push into the 55s, 56s this season. The usage is about right. I think he's got a real chance at cracking the top 130, top 140 for fantasy this year, depending on what role they give him. Only 27 minutes. I think that those minutes between him and Hunter should be switched around. Whether Lloyd Pierce does that or not remains to be seen, but to me, he absolutely is the better prospect out of those two and showed it last season, and I think there is really some big steps forward that Radish can take, and I do think that he can have some top 100 fantasy seasons. Really, really impressive to see a guy that was as bad as he was turn around and become average, and as a rookie, being average is actually a really big compliment. Most rookies are shit. They are not good majority of the time. They might flash some okay things and some interesting numbers, but most of the time they're not good. Radish went from being actively the worst player in the NBA to being a guy that you can rely upon to provide average rotation minutes. And that is a massive, massive win. And that's where Radish was this season. So I'm really impressed with those steps. Now, the thing we have to look at is the beginning of the season real? Is the end of the season real? Because research has been done that rookies and having hot streak or shooting improvements towards the end of the season is not indicative of that is now the new norm of what they become. It's like you have to weigh the whole season. That is way more indicative versus, well, if they do a 20-game hot streak to end the season. That has been researched. I think Kevin Pelton had that data, and that has been shown that is the case. Now, there's always outliers to that, but if they finished, you could say that Jarrett Culver from Minnesota, he started to shoot well at the end of the season. Yeah, but he shot terribly to begin. So which one's real? And the same we say for Radish. So we have to have a level of caution there with him. But I just do think that he didn't turn the corner, because that's, again, a nebulous phrase that really can get twisted. But I thought he got things working and gave me hope that he wouldn't be the worst player in the NBA. And from where he was to begin the season, that is a huge win. Let's talk about the other guy who is always going to be compared with Radish because they were drafted at 4 and 9 in the same draft, and that is Deandre Hunter. He's going to be 23 in a couple of months' time. He played 32 minutes a night as a rookie, started majority, I think all of the games actually, averaged 12 points with 1.7 threes, 4.5 rebounds, and almost 2 assists on 41 and 76% shooting 36% from 3. I didn't like Deandre Hunter as a prospect. I didn't like him as a fantasy player. I don't like him as an NBA player. Sure, he's a great bloke. No problem with that. 202nd ranked player in fantasy this season. Bad PIPM, bad Raptor, poor true shooting. We gave him the excuse or the rationale. Why is he such a good defender with such horrible defensive stats? Well, it's the defensive coaching scheme at Virginia. That's why he doesn't generate any defensive numbers. They force those numbers to be low artificially. Well, his numbers were low in 32 minutes. 0.7 steals and 0.3 blocks. Maybe it's just him. I think we overrate a little bit of this defensive scheme stuff coming out of college. Matisse Thybulle, all his steals and blocks. Washington's scheme allows him to do that. Well, no, he's just good at it. Deandre Hunter, really low defensive numbers. It's Virginia's scheme. No, he's just bad at it. And there are 2 examples. You can give me other ones that prove the opposite. But I think we need to, I think we overrate that a little bit, that defensive scheme issue, and players can just stand out. And the same thing happened coming out of Arizona for those guys. Well, that scheme, Aaron Gordon, DeAndre Ayton, they'll put up better defensive numbers in the pros. Oh, will they? Maybe not. That's a lot of these things tend to happen, and I think that's something to bear in mind. Now, Hunter, I would be floored at this point if he ever had a top 50 season. I think that there is a legitimate risk that he never has a top 100 season. I just don't know what he does well. I thought he was okay out there at times defensively. Not spectacular, but okay. And I'm not really sure if that's what you want out of your number 4 pick. He doesn't show really too much in self-creation or creation for others. And the defensive stuff wasn't where you'd want it to be. So that's, I'm a little worried about what that means for where Hunter goes. He just feels like someone who, I don't know, who is just there and takes up minutes and doesn't actually produce good numbers or is necessarily a big winning type player for NBA teams. Again, I hated the pick. He's an older player as well. He's going to be 23 soon. Hawks fans might hate this. And I'm going to say, you're being too harsh on him. He was really good as a rookie. And maybe that's true. Maybe I am being too harsh on him. But I just think that what he was advertised to be wasn't there. Didn't think he was a great defender. And I just don't know where the offensive upside is for him. He did shoot 36% on threes, which is a solid enough number. Doesn't take many of them, but takes enough. So there is some value in him. I'm not saying he's completely trash. And I think he can be a solid enough rotation piece, maybe a starter on a bad team. But for fantasy, I just don't really see it for Deandre Hunter at this point. Next up is Deandre Bembry. This is a guy who had all the skill set. He's a guy who can get steals, flashy passer, weird scorer type who just completely fell off the face of the earth. 21 minutes a night this year. He is a restricted free agent coming up. I don't think that they'll extend him a qualifying offer. He's got a $7 million cap hold. They'll get rid of that. 2 assists, 1.3 steals. The shooting is really a work in progress. And by a work in progress, I mean it's never going to happen. 23% from 3, 54 from the line. He's 26 years of age already. I think we've got to have some significant worries about where Bembry goes from here. Will he catch on with another team? Sure. Will he be a regular rotation player? I reckon at age 26, you've had 4 years to show it on a bad Hawks team, and you haven't. That is some definite red flags. PIPM was negative. True shooting at 50 was bad. Raptor minus 1.7 is not great. He had some advanced stuff going in his favor earlier in his career, but he just really hasn't taken the necessary steps forward. The shooting hasn't come around. He's had injuries which have bothered him throughout his career as well. I'm just not sure where Bembry goes from here. The Undertaker, Dwayne Dedman. Now, we know that Dedman played for the Hawks last season and was quite good. Went to the Kings and all of a sudden forgot how to be an NBA player. Came back to the Hawks and looked a little bit better, but it was so weird. He played only 16 minutes a night for the Kings. Came back to the Hawks, played 23 minutes a night as a starter at times when Alex Len was out, and I thought he looked much better playing for the Hawks. But Clint Capela's their starting center, so what the hell does this mean for The Undertaker, who's 31 years of age? He averaged 6 and 6 with 0.9 blocks, and amazingly, his true shooting was 47%. This is a big man who was bombing threes at like almost 40%. He hit them at 21% last year. Just an unfathomable fall off in shooting. I think that will bounce back. But Dedman's run of being a starting center, of being a fantasy relevant player, is absolutely cooked at this stage. One of the weirdest falls from grace that you'll see as a drop-off, and it's done. I think he can be better than what he was this season, marginally, but not by a huge amount. His PRPM actually was all right, negative 0.27, but the shooting is horrible, and he was much better as a member of the Hawks, where he still shot only 22% from 3. Again, this is a 38% shooter last year, so I'm just not sure where the hell he goes from here. He did block 1.5 shots a game for the Hawks, which is massive. And if you can still block 1.5 shots a game in 20 minutes, although he shouldn't be getting 20 minutes because 48 minutes at center should be Clint Capela, John Collins, and then maybe 10 minutes, 11 minutes of someone else. That's really all it should be. Then gives you Hunter at the 4, Radish at the 3, Herter at the 2, Young at the 1. That is the lineup that you should be looking at. That should be your 6 guys that should be getting the bulk of those minutes, and Dedman should be getting 12, 14 minutes maybe. So I think his value is absolutely in the toilet, and that should come to no surprise to anyone who's watched him last year. Skal Labissière is a player who's on the Hawks. He was on the Kings and the Blazers this season, came across to the Hawks. He didn't play a game for them. He's a restricted free agent as well, 257th ranked player. Advanced numbers are actually all right. True shooting, 59%, pretty okay as well for Skal. He averaged 6 points and 5 rebounds with a block a game. True shooting, as I said, at 59% was pretty strong. He only hit 23% of his threes. I think he can occasionally be an okay rotation player, but I'm not sure we need to get too excited about him as he's heading into his age 25 season. Next up is Damian Jones, a player that inexplicably has started NBA games in the last 2 years. Another restricted free agent who they won't be looking to bring back is my guess. 5 points and 4 rebounds, 16 minutes a game, 68% shooting. 71 true shooting is good, but this guy started games for Atlanta, started games for Golden State, and had no business even being a rotation player. And now he won't have any business as a rotation player. Will he find himself catching on as a backup or third string center somewhere? Maybe somewhere like Philadelphia gets him as a third stringer if they don't want to bring the cock monster back. I could see that. He's young. He can block some shots. He's a shithouse defender. He can't shoot. He's not a good scorer. I don't really know what he's bringing. He blocks some shots. That's about it for Damian Jones, and I don't think that you should have too much faith in him as a long-term prospect. Brandon Goodwin. I liked what I saw from Brandon Goodwin. Now, he is 25 years of age. He's a two-way point guard. He averaged 6 points on 40% shooting with 93% from the line. The advanced stuff is not that big because he didn't play a huge amount, but his G League numbers I thought were really good for this year. He averaged 19 points with 8 assists, almost 6 rebounds. He shot 39% from 3. He was a 38% three-point shooter the year before as well. A strong shooter with a good distribution skills, strong steal numbers. I thought he was pretty good with his numbers coming out of the G League. And his G League PIPM was 1.88, which is a really strong number. Is he the answer to their backup point guard problem? I think they'd look to address that in the draft and free agency. But as a third-string point guard, I think that he is not a bad option. Just someone to keep an eye on, see where he goes. Does he push into a role? He can be better than he was this year. I don't think he's a complete disaster as a player. Absolutely a guy that if he's forced into your rotation short term, I don't think you'd be completely discouraged with it. Bruno Fernando. I thought there was a chance that Bruno Fernando would start this year. He did. It was not good when he started, and he really struggled. And now that Capela is there, Collins is back, Deadman's around still. The amount of options they had to bring in around Fernando because he struggled was a problem. He started 13 games, 17 minutes, 5 points and 5 rebounds in those starts, shooting 41%. This is a guy who I thought could be a decent enough, stretchy type big who can block some shots. It just never eventuated for him this season as a second-round pick. I thought he was a best steal for them, and he still might develop. I think he's still a few years away from his best basketball, of course, given that he's only 22 and played as a rookie. And I think that he probably does push into a backup center role in the next 2 to 3 years. But quite a disappointing beginning to his career, Fernando. He was given those opportunities, which he wasn't ready for. I think we all understand that at this point. He wasn't really there and ready for that role. But the reason I thought he would get a shot at starting is because of the other players around. I thought he held up okay defensively. Not a complete disaster on that end. He doesn't block shots at a high rate, just 0.9 per 36. 0.9 per 36, which isn't a good number. But I thought he rebounded okay. We just got to work on that shooting, and the free throws were rough as well. So there is some big improvement coming for Fernando. I think he can be a rotation player in 2 or 3 years' time. Trevion Graham also came across to Atlanta. He's 27 years of age. The theory behind Graham is good, a defender who can hit threes, but he can't hit threes anymore. 28% shooting, 36% overall. Free throws dropped off, defensive stuff dropped off, efficiency dropped off. Wouldn't be surprised if he's not a player with an NBA gig next season. And then the last couple of guys are players who we really didn't see much in the NBA. Charlie Brown Jr., 22 years of age only, Brown. Only played 40 minutes in the league, 2 points per game at 32% shooting, so therefore his numbers are all over the shop. In the G League, he played 33 minutes and averaged 17, 7, and 3 with a triple one, 1.2 threes, 1.3 steals, 1.2 blocks. That's really interesting. Can Charlie Brown work his way onto a full-time contract? He is a restricted free agent coming up this year. His PIPM in the G League was negative 0.46, so not great, but if you're in a 400-player deep league, that ability to be a triple one player while getting some rebounds, while scoring, while getting some assists, and being an all-round contributor at still age only 22, not a disaster of a player, and not someone that you go, well, he's now my 11th man on a non-playoff team, and he's playing all right. I think there is a little bit to see with Charlie Brown. Not super excited with him, but a little bit to see. And I think that's it. That is it, because that was the wrong player that I brought up there. So Charlie Brown is the last guy that we're going to talk about here for the Atlanta Hawks. I'll be back tomorrow looking at your Detroit Pistons. So get those questions in on Twitter and on Instagram. And don't forget, subscribe, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and on YouTube, guys. We are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.